Hello everyone, and welcome back to Boss Economic World, the only show that puts on the X-ray glasses to see the truth behind the headlines. Alright, folks, let's talk about flying. Imagine you're a passenger on the world's largest, most complex jumbo jet, let's call it the USS Economy. You've got a seasoned pilot up front, Captain Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve. For the past few years, he's been trying to pull off the trickiest landing in aviation history, bringing this massive plane down from the high altitudes of runaway inflation without stalling the engines and crashing into the jagged mountains of recession. It's a delicate, white-knuckle job that requires perfect visibility and instruments that are accurate to the decimal point. Now, imagine that right as you're making the final approach, a couple of bickering politicians in the back of the plane storm the cockpit, smash all the instruments with a hammer, and black out the windows. Sounds insane, right? A Hollywood disaster movie plot? Well, friends, welcome to the United States of America, October 15, 2025. Because that's exactly what's happening. The government shutdown isn't just a political soap opera for cable news, it's a deliberate act of economic sabotage that has just blinded our pilot. And the most important instrument they just broke is the one that tells us how fast we're going and how hot the engines are running, the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. CPI? BLS? Ugh, more alphabet soup from Washington. Stick with me, because this isn't just academic jargon. The CPI is, quite literally, the price tag on your life. Think about everything you buy, that ridiculously expensive cup of coffee, the gas for your car, the rent that makes you cry a little every month, your kids' sneakers, even your Netflix subscription. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, has a team of what I like to call economic detectives. Every single month, these folks fan out across the country to track the prices of a basket of about 80,000 items and services. They're the unsung heroes of economic data. They go to the grocery store to see if the price of eggs has gone up. They visit doctors' offices. They check airline ticket prices. They take all this information, run it through some high-powered statistical magic, and out comes a single number. That number, the CPI, is our nation's official fever reading. It tells us if the economy is healthy, running a bit hot with inflation, or getting dangerously cold and heading for a downturn. Why does this one number matter so much? Oh, let me count the ways. 1. Your grandma's Social Security check, the annual cost of living adjustment for more than 70 million Americans, retirees, veterans, disabled individuals, is tied directly to the CPI. A higher CPI means a bigger check to help them keep up with rising costs. No CPI, and the Social Security Administration is basically guessing how much to give them. 2. The Federal Reserve's big red button, Captain Powell and his crew at the Fed have one primary job: keep inflation around 2%. The CPI is their main dashboard gauge. If the CPI is too high, they hit the raise interest rates button, which makes your mortgage, car loan, and credit card debt more expensive. If it's too low, they might cut rates. Without accurate CPI, they're flying blind. Do they raise rates and risk a recession? Or do they hold steady and risk inflation roaring back to life? 3. Wall Street's crystal ball, every trader, every investment fund, every 401k manager on the planet hangs on this number. The CPI report day is like the Super Bowl of economic data. It can move markets by trillions of dollars in a matter of seconds. An uncertain or non-existent report injects a level of fear and chaos that makes investors run for the hills. So, the CPI isn't just a number. It's the bedrock of financial planning for everyone from the Federal Reserve Chairman to your uncle who day trades in his basement. And now, thanks to the shutdown that started on October 1st, those economic detectives are locked out of their offices. They've been furloughed. The in-person price collection, which is the vast majority of the 80,000 items, has completely stopped. Think about it. We are halfway through October, and the BLS hasn't collected a single new price. Not one. Omer Sharif, a sharp guy who runs a firm called Inflation Insights, put it perfectly: starting now, accuracy is getting worse. By the third week, you're looking at very bad quality, or no data at all. This isn't like other government reports where companies can just upload their data online. This is a boots-on-the-ground, painstaking process. And here's the kicker: you can't go back in time. You can't call up a store on November 5th and ask, "Hey, what was the exact price of a gallon of 2% milk on October 12th? The moment is gone. The data is lost forever. Now, you might have heard that the September CPI report, which was supposed to be released last week, is now coming out on October 24th. Why the exception? Because the Social Security Administration basically threw a fit. They have a legal deadline to calculate next year's COLA, and they told Congress, "We literally cannot do our job without this number." So, in a rare move, the White House ordered the BLS to bring back a skeleton crew to assemble the September data, which was thankfully collected before the shutdown. But that's like finding one bottle of clean water in the middle of the desert. It solves today's problem, but we're still going to die of thirst tomorrow. The October CPI report, due in November, is the one that's truly in jeopardy. And that's the one the Fed desperately needs for its crucial December meeting, which will set the tone for the entire global economy in 2026. So, what does the government do when it has giant, gaping holes in its data? It does what you did on your high school math homework when you didn't know the answer, it guesses. In bureaucratic terms, this is called imputation. It's a fancy word for a statistically informed guess. Let's say they couldn't get the price for fresh avocados in California this month. They might look at the price change for avocados in neighboring Arizona, or they might look at the price change for other fresh vegetables in California, and then impute a value. Erica Grosjean, a former BLS commissioner who lived through the 2013 shutdown, said it bluntly, they cannot go back to the past, so they will impute more. Let me translate that for you. The government is about to release a report on the cost of living, and a significant chunk of it will be, well, made up. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess nonetheless. It's like a chef trying to tell you what a dish tastes like by only smelling the ingredients. You might get close, but you could also be spectacularly wrong. What if there was a sudden, dramatic price change in the middle of the month? Let's say a new bird flu scare causes egg prices to spike 50% in the third week of October. Or maybe a breakthrough in battery technology causes the price of used electric vehicles, a huge component of recent inflation data, to suddenly plummet. The imputation models won't catch that. They're designed to smooth things over, not to capture lightning in a bottle. They will completely miss these crucial turning points. The other solutions are just as ugly. One is to reweight the categories. In essence, if they can't measure the price of new cars, they might just give more weight to the price of public transportation. This fundamentally distorts the picture of what average people are actually spending their money on. Another idea being floated by old-timers like Michael Horrigan, who now leads the Upjohn Institute, is to just skip October and compare November's prices directly to September's. He says this is a legitimate estimate. With all due respect to Mr. Horrigan, that's like a doctor taking your temperature in September, then again in November, and claiming the average of the two is your temperature for October. What if you had a raging fever and almost died in October? The data would just show a mild warmth. It's a recipe for missing the entire story. This problem is even worse because the BLS was already struggling. Due to staffing cuts during the Trump administration, they were already leaning more heavily on imputation than they'd like. The shutdown is like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already smoldering. Let's go back to our pilot, Captain Powell. He's at the Fed's big meeting at the end of this month, and then the really important one in December. He's getting a dashboard reading for October that is either completely blank or flickering with numbers that his engineers are telling him are mostly guesses. What does he do? This is where it gets terrifying. Fed Chair Powell himself said it in his typical, understated Fed speak. He said if the shutdown goes on, the Fed's job could become more challenging. Let me translate more challenging from central banker essay into plain English. We will be flying blind and might accidentally crash the economy, killing your job and your 401k. He has two terrible options. Option A, be aggressive. He can assume inflation is still a problem because the last reliable data showed it was sticky. So, to be safe, he keeps interest rates high or even raises them again. The result? You pay more for your mortgage. Businesses stop hiring because borrowing money is too expensive. The economy slows down, and we tip into a recession we might not have needed. Option B, be passive. He can assume the trend is heading in the right direction and that inflation is cooling off. He holds rates steady or signals cuts are coming. But what if he's wrong? What if that bird flu egg price spike was real and part of a broader trend? Inflation, the monster we've spent 2 years fighting, comes roaring back to life, and he'll have to slam on the brakes even harder later, causing an even worse recession. There is no good choice here. The very uncertainty created by the bad data becomes a toxic element in itself. Markets hate uncertainty more than they hate bad news. We're already seeing it. The VIX index, Wall Street's fear gauge, has jumped nearly 20% since the shutdown began. Investors are pulling money out of the market not because of any specific news, but because of the lack of news. They're selling first and asking questions later. And this chaos has a global ripple effect. The PCE, or Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, which is actually the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, uses CPI data as a key ingredient. So if the CPI is garbage, the PCE will be garbage, too. The November CPI will also be tainted because the BLS collects some prices on a bi-monthly basis. This is a cascading failure. The entire world pegs its financial safety to the stability of the US dollar and the predictability of the US Federal Reserve. When we voluntarily blind our own policymakers, it sends a shockwave of instability from Tokyo to London. It's the economic equivalent of taking out the world's most important lighthouse keeper during a hurricane. Economists are a cautious bunch. You'll hear them on TV saying things like Veronica Clark at Citigroup, don't put too much weight on anything abnormal in October. Take it with a grain of salt. A grain of salt? Friends, Washington is asking us to swallow the entire salt mine. This isn't a statistical anomaly. This is a self-inflicted wound of epic proportions. The 2013 shutdown was bad enough it delayed the CPI by 2 weeks and the final report only had a 75% sample size. But the stakes are infinitely higher today. In 2013, we were in a slow, stable recovery with near zero inflation. In 2025, we are on a knife's edge, battling the most aggressive inflation in 40 years, with a fragile global supply chain and geopolitical tensions simmering everywhere. This shutdown proves that the biggest risk to the American economy isn't China, it isn't a new pandemic, it isn't a foreign war. It's us. It's our own political dysfunction that has decided to turn the basic, neutral, essential functioning of government data into a political hostage. They are weaponizing our economic dashboard. They are gambling with your job, your savings, and your financial future to score a few cheap political points. So when that October CPI report eventually comes out, whether it's delayed, heavily imputed, or based on a 2-month average, don't just take it with a grain of salt. See it for what it is, a symbol of a broken system. A monument to the moment when the people in charge of the world's most important economy decided it was a good idea to close their eyes and hope for the best. They're not just shutting down the government. They're shutting down reality. And when the numbers are fake, the only thing that's real is the risk. That's all the time we have for today. Stay informed, stay critical. I'll see you next time on Boss Economic World.